Leonie Baldwin, recently free lady.
Absolutely.
And tennising on Wednesdays, I think that's kind of an important thing.
Absolutely. Yesterday was my first tennis, all-day tennis.
Is it professional?
Well, I wouldn't
They'll
call
buy
it
you morning
professional.
tea if you do okay. We're not here to talk about tennis, let's be frank. An extraordinary career, and you had people at your farewell from scattered around New South Wales.
Absolutely, yeah. From all the areas that I'd worked in, mainly with my work with Sport and Recreation, Department of Sport and Recreation, but of course from the Central Coast as well, which was lovely.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. Yeah. And we want to talk a little about the past and a lot about the future.
Good.
If we go back, that's living memory, the last 3 to 5 years. You look back and you think, hey, it was cool to be involved in those decisions from a work perspective. What sort of projects will go with you forever, do you think?
Gosh, there were many, and I suppose it's sort of hard to choose just a couple. I'll choose one that, or I'll choose a couple, but I'll start with one that I think people might be a bit surprised about. And that was when I first started in my work here on the Central Coast in 1999. It was also at the same time that they developed the position of a regional minister. And of course that was John Della Bosca. And when John came in, one of the things that he found was that there was a lot of conflict happening, particularly around regional planning on the Central Coast. And so he developed what was called Central Coast Moving Forward. And some people will remember that. But Central Coast Moving Forward was about two things. One, it was about identifying strategies for the Central Coast, or priorities for the Central Coast, sorry. But really it was about uniting the Central Coast. And Central Coast Moving Forward really achieved that. Now, I know that there are a lot of knockers about Central Coast Moving Forward because people looked at the end result being the 24 priorities. And a lot of people have said it didn't achieve anything. But in effect, it actually achieved, I had to do a review on Central Coast Moving Forward sometime after the event. And after several years, we'd actually achieved 22 of those 24 priorities, which was pretty good. And the ones that we didn't achieve was one around making between Woy Woy and YE an internal commuter run. In terms of the trains, and the other one was around Warnervale Town Centre, which of course is a challenge in itself. So it really did very well. So that was that one. I think another project that I really will take with me is around the Regional Economic Development and Employment Strategy. And the reason I would take that one with me because it was also about uniting the community, but it was also about giving the Central Coast a framework to actually move forward in terms of economic development. It's not the answer to economic development, but it actually brings people together so that we don't get disparate groups doing different things. So it's using resources much better in a much more efficient way.
I'd love to talk about REDES, and I don't. I'll try not to interrupt too much.
That's okay.
REDES is such a critical document,
absolutely,
and lots of people quote it. Do we measure ourselves against it well enough, do you think? Or is it just a document Peter will hold up?
Oh no, I mean one of the good things about REDES was we also set up a very, very good governance arrangement and a performance indicator program. So every 6 months the Minister meets with the 2 GMs and the Chair of RDA, who's just changed.
Indeed. Welcome, David.
Yeah, absolutely. To look at, number one, a report on the progress of REDES, and secondly, to look at where there are blockages or issues of concern in relation to progression.
See, I don't hear about that.
No.
Are they just not telling me and everyone else knows? Or do you think communication could be better there?
Oh, I think communication could be better, absolutely.
And those still happen?
That still happens,
monthly?
Absolutely.
It's on my
and the Minister is certainly committed, or certainly when I left, he's certainly committed to continuing that. And then the other thing is that it has a rolling action plan with it. So it's not one of these, it's just a document that sits on the desk. There is a group of people who have the role of leading the particular strategies. I think there's 6 strategies from memory. And each of those strategies has a leader, and they get together on a very regular basis to review what they're doing, to progress what they're doing. And then they feed into the reporting process that goes into the Minister. But the important thing is that there is a rolling action plan that underpins all of that.
We need to know.
Absolutely.
And I'm not the only... with a developer, we were looking at the numbers from REDES, suggesting that our population was going to grow to by 100,000 by 2030 or 2035.
Yes.
And we kind of did the maths going back and saying, okay, well, how many dwellings do we have with 2 people per dwelling, etc., etc. And we were saying, okay, we need about 2,000 dwellings per year, and we just don't see that happening.
No, well, it's not happening at the moment. There's a downturn. Yeah. Absolutely.
So, and I guess well, it hasn't happened, and I know I shouldn't. I'm not going to pick on you.
That's good.
Please don't pick on me. But that sort of discussion, I think, should be opened up, because certainly our constituents are the business owners who need to be engaged with that, and maybe it filters to a certain level. And we're keen to get the minister here, and he has extraordinary priorities at the moment. So
absolutely,
and we will get him, and that will be one of the things that we would love to open up a channel to the business leaders because I don't think we share enough with that.
I'd agree. Well, one of the good things, just before I left, we put in place a review of REDES. Because it needs to be reviewed and updated, particularly with the global issue. I mean, when we first went in, when we were developing REDES, it was a different...
Well, it was 2007 it started, I think, or was that when it was presented? I guess?
No, 2010, in fact, it was launched, but of course there was probably a 2-year development. I mean, it did take, there was a lot of research that was done to develop it. The review won't take 2 years, but because a lot of the groundwork has been done.
So who leads that review?
RDA will lead that review.
Okay. Welcome, David.
Absolutely.
Yes. And Andrew.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
But they'll do that with the government agencies, and certainly I expect DPC will take a significant role.
Okay. Things that you kind of look back and say, oh, I wish we'd got closer with that?
Oh, well, certainly Warrnambool Town Centre is one of those. I would have liked to have actually taken that a little bit further. We're very, very close. In fact, I think we're so close now. It does need some support from government, and in terms of some dollars, and I'm really hopeful that will happen.
Dollars?
Well, I suppose it's around priorities. I mean, look, government doesn't have a lot of dollars, no matter what government you're talking about. But it's a matter of priorities.
For it to happen, we have to find the dollars.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that was one of them. And look, there's a myriad of other things that I would have liked to have actually achieved a little bit more on. I mean, if you take the Adelaide, for instance, I think we really, excuse the expression, missed the boat a bit on that one.
I don't think I can excuse
like that one.
It's so appalling.
Sorry. But what we missed, I think, and what I was really, really keen about doing was providing a celebration for the community. We missed that because of the group of people that were opposed to the sinking of the Adelaide, which was really unfortunate. So we went into this 12-month hiatus period. It ended up then just a sinking. There are a lot of people that attended the scuttling, but it wasn't the celebration. And I think that's what Central Coast really needs. Central Coast really needs for the people to unite and to celebrate. And they do that in disparate sort of things. But it would have been fabulous for them to celebrate that and then have an ownership around it.
Can we talk about scuttling things and noisy little groups?
Absolutely.
Perhaps the landing.
Yes, that's another one.
And the misinformation that is going on around that. The commercialisation of the foreshore. For me, it doesn't seem like we're losing access to the foreshore. We're actually enhancing it, and I guess everything's a perception.
Yes.
Is that?
That's true. Look, I can understand, and I agree with people, of course, having a view. I mean, we all have views. It would be a sad world if we didn't have a view, and if we didn't have the ability to be able to indicate what our view was publicly. But when we distort the facts and influence people by the distortion. That's really what I don't like. And fear, absolutely. And that's exactly what happened with the Adelaide. People became fearful. I had one woman who rang me and said, I'm a grandmother and please don't sink that boat because my children love going for a swim in the rock pool and I don't want them diseased or, getting ill. I mean, you know, those sorts of distortions are really, you know, quite un-Australian, I think, and inappropriate. The landing, look, the landing's a must for the Central Coast.
It's about celebration of, I guess, value, and I hesitate to use the word investment because people will say, well, it's not just about the money. It's not just about the money.
Absolutely not. We really need not just the landing, but the revitalisation of Gosford. The revitalisation of Gosford, I think, will be the growing up of the Central Coast. It actually will build the Central Coast and allow it to stand alongside some of those other really big regional cities. It's sort of like it's coming out almost.
Yeah.
And, you know, it needs to do that for the self-esteem of the people who live here.
Why do we appear so apathetic? Because it is a minority, and yet the vast majority, when asked, approve in principle the whole thing. Will we overcome that? Can we stir that up?
Well, I don't think Central Coast is unique. I mean, it
probably,
happens everywhere.
Yeah,
but I suppose one of the things that's difficult for the Central Coast is that we really do need those developments. And there is, even the people I think who are opposed to some of the issues of the landing are not necessarily opposed to the fact that we need some development. It's the amount of development, I think. And the issues, there's some complexities in that too, the issues around the pool and those sorts of things, which aren't really part of the bigger picture. They're, people of course want their pool, and people will argue about what size that pool is, but that's not part of this bigger picture, and unfortunately that got tied up into this this argument.
Yeah.
But the bigger picture is we really do need that development. We need a development on the landing. It has to work for an investor. And there's that balance, and that's the problem.
And I think that's also a point that the opponents choose to ignore as well. They think, well, we've got unlimited money, and we don't need to make it an economic return on investment.
And look, they understand that. I mean, most people are fairly, you don't have to be Einstein to work that out. An investor needs to get value for their money, otherwise they're going to walk away.
Indeed.
And we've had so many of them walk away on the Central Coast because of that. So part of the issue, I think, in this one is for government to make that hard decision. The people can have their say, but the hard decision has to come about from the government to allow or disallow that to happen.
Well, we support that theory and that action.
Absolutely.
Indeed. Anything? Well, no. Warnervale we've talked about.
That's
Let's
right.
not talk. It's kind of what would you love to see happen in the next 12 months? I guess.
Oh well, gee. One of the things that I was working on just before I left with Warnervale, and it's a bit of a misconception, I think, too. Warnervale has been a very, very difficult project, not because the people don't want it. It's because there's been obviously some global changes in terms of the economic situation, which have made it very, very difficult for the people who bought land at a very premium price and now have to develop it at a much less premium price. And that's really the fact. The other issue is that Warnervale also needs a lot of infrastructure, an awful lot of infrastructure. And the previous government had a policy that if the development requires infrastructure by way of that development, then the developers have to pay for that development, or for that infrastructure. And the sort of infrastructure that needs is a big intersection on Sparks Road. It needs a very, an entry road that goes into the town centre that's expensive, plus a lot of other infrastructure. Now, so we've been trying to work through the issue of government's policy and the need for this fabulous, town centre that's going to mean so much for the people in the northern end of the region. And I think that's just starting to work. I think there is, under the current government, there's an understanding, okay, we might need to actually have to review this policy of government and relook at this situation. So that's where we were at the time. The landholders, we'd negotiated an arrangement and also received a $2 million grant from government for the entry road. So that was basically right to go. It was just the intersection. So that's where we were when we left it, or when I left it. And I think it will actually move forward. So it needs a few $1 million, about $8 million from government.
If you say it quickly, it's not a lot.
No, it's not really. Well, 8 million's nothing, really. And for $8 million, they will get that intersection and it will move ahead. So I would dearly love to see that intersection started, the entry road started, and for that town centre to move ahead.
Yeah. And there is great. We've had David Hannon on the on Business Insider talking about well, he doesn't mind throwing some money at the upgraded existing railway station. So there is great like you said,
there's a lot
great
of
enthusiasm.
And you know, I mean, there's going to be a lot of development in that area. There's already development in that area. The people have said to me, we moved to this area because we understood there was going to be a town centre. So there is a huge expectation that there will be a town centre. Woolies are absolutely committed to actually build their centre. So I think once we get the intersection, it will be the catalyst to actually make everything else move.
Okay.
So I'm confident that will happen.
Yeah, we'll leave that as the focal point.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's the region. What's happening with you?
Well, retired.
And resting. And
resting.
Signed up to
Playing
a semi-professional tennis team.
Look, obviously...
What do you want to do?
What do I want to do? My husband retired at the end of last year, so we're looking forward to some time together, and that's really paramount because of the nature of our jobs and the nature of us as people. We've been very much
in government as well? Or?
He was a teacher at St Eddie's.
Oh, right, okay.
And was actually an old boy at Eddie's.
Wow, so the front of public service, if you like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And incidentally, his family comes from the Central Coast. His father delivered ice around Brisbane Water at Wagstaff. So
did you drag him around New South Wales? While
absolutely.
Well,
as you do.
Okay.
He won't say that.
Well, Bob can cut that. So, okay. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So we want some time together. We've got a couple of hobbies that we'll do. We've got some travel that we want to do. But of course, it's somewhat hard for me to, let go. I mean, I have an interest,
we don't want to let you go
passion.
from the business side of the Central Coast. Well, from business side anywhere dealing with government, we wouldn't want you to let you go. So
there's two sides to it. I mean, I want to be very, very fair to my the new regional coordinator, Alan Blackman, who's taken over, who's fabulous. He will do a really, really good job. So I've got to be very, very fair to Alan, and so I don't want to get involved in things that DPC would obviously be involved in. But I have actually, I've formed a business, or I've gained a business name called Ideal Outcomes, and my intention is to basically ensure that my skills that I have, I can use them in whatever I decide to do. And I haven't really any...
It's a great brand.
It is.
It can be applied. Hey, a highly politically appropriate brand. It can be applied to anything. All we do is create ideal outcomes.
Absolutely.
And that can be anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and I certainly see my skills and have, in terms of developing the business name, have looked at problem solving, facilitation, and mediation. Mediation's an interesting one. I actually have a certificate in mediation and want to get my accreditation. I don't want to get into personal relationships in mediation. But certainly, that skill is a fabulous skill, and one that I've actually been able to use a lot more so with groups and with individuals. So I'm keen to do a little bit more in terms of that.
Excellent.
And obviously keen to keep an eye on what's going on, and if the opportunity comes along, then I'd like to certainly add some value to whatever comes along virtually.
Yeah.
Apart from that, we'll do some travel.
Well, it's work life then. All of a sudden.
Absolutely. I have a life.
And you can put a bit of work around it if you need to.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that. And I have a mother that lives at Cootamundra, and she's obviously elderly, so we'll be doing some trooping to and from Cootamundra a little bit more regularly, which is good.
Nice.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Actually, my father's from Coota.
Oh,
well.
really?
So, yeah. Actually, yes. But several decades.
Okay.
Well, like 60 years ago, but anyway. So, but great country,
Absolutely,
a nice place to visit.
Yeah.
So, at this point, Leonie, we offer you a magic wand. Well, Bob offers it to you because he's got the power, and to change anything in business on the Central Coast that you think appropriate of changing. What would you wave your magic wand over to change?
Okay. Look, I think that one of the issues on the Central Coast with business is the fact that we're still young. It's sort of good that we don't have really big businesses like, for instance, in Newcastle, to a certain extent, because once they go, and they go down hard. But the multitude of very small businesses that we have has its impact on the Central Coast as well. Government can do so much. They can't do everything, but I think that they can do more, and for business. And
what would more take the shape of?
Well, I think certainly around infrastructure, there's no doubt that infrastructure has to work better.
And when you talk about that, is it transport?
Transport primarily.
Right.
But in terms of some of those big projects that we just mentioned, it's about understanding the priorities. For instance, Warrnambool Town Centre will bring a lot of jobs to the Central Coast, an awful lot of jobs, as will the landing. But also some of the industrial parks. I mean, Bushells Ridge, for instance. Actually, that was my very first job,
Is it?
Which I failed on, I have to say.
You forgot to tell me
I forgot to tell you that.
That's a biggie.
But Bob Carr actually provided me with a challenge and said, I want you to bring Bushells Ridge to the marketplace. So I failed.
No, well, the history won't show you as failing, I don't think.
That's right.
That was,
it's a very difficult one.
That was bigger. That's bigger than Warrnambool. We think it will. That will be the one that says Warrnambool was really simple.
Yes, absolutely. Summersby was an interesting one, which I did bring to the marketplace. Right. But look, that whole issue.
So that infrastructure and getting people around on the centre. Are we serious about that? Do we really understand when we talk about money required, getting people from east to west and north to south?
Look, the difficulty, I mean, this is wearing my ex-government hat, it's really expensive building roads on the Central Coast. There's a real dilemma. If you build more roads...
Because we've got to go through floodplains and...
Well, and the geography of the place.
Okay.
All of these lovely...
Lakes
and rivers and creeks.
Can we fill some in? No,
no. Absolutely not. We wouldn't live here otherwise.
Indeed.
But we've got lots of lovely little places like Patonga and Pretty Beach and all those areas, and then
Hades
out
Bay.
Tukely. Look at Tukely, Norville. I mean, it's just so hard to get around. So that is, but it's also expensive because we've already, the place wasn't planned that well. It was, it was a holiday place, and so as a result, every time RMS, as they call, Road and Maritime Services, have to go and build now, they have to acquire houses. And that's I mean, look at the Central Coast Highway up around Womberall. It's hugely expensive, that road. So that is an issue. But if you look in Newcastle, to actually go from A to B is so easy. You get on a road that goes 90 or 100 in some cases, and
you're there.
You're there. So that's what's missing on the Central Coast, and I don't believe that that's being planned. But coming back to what I was saying, the other issue is we can plan, we can build lots and lots of roads. What we do is put more people on the roads, and that's an issue on the Central Coast. Government is doing a lot around better bus services. The bus services are a lot better now. That issue around getting people on trains, I think that came out of Central Coast moving forward is a really good idea. Look at a better commuter system using a current already there infrastructure. To do that, we need that passing loop in relation to freight trains, because that's what mucks that up. So yes, we can do better, but if we actually, if we do better in terms of our road infrastructure, it will help business as well. But can I come back to that? The other thing I think government can do better is about providing more incentives. We're losing so many businesses, of our bigger businesses, to other states because we don't provide a lot of incentives to them. And the incentives we do provide to them is so tied up in red tape that it makes it very, very difficult for businesses just turn off. And I think we can do a lot more around apprenticeships and traineeships, we really need to look after our young people. And again, that's tied up in red tape. There are opportunities available.
Because hearing you come from red tape and talk about red tape just terrifies me because you have seen it. You have never had the scissors to cut it.
That's right.
But it doesn't matter which minister we talk to or which member of parliament and which business. Every business is unified on get rid of red tape. It just seems to go into the ether, and that we
absolutely. But there are simpler ways of doing things. One of the things that
what's stopping us doing it?
I think it's a culture. I mean, one of the things that I sort of pride myself on is not necessarily always abiding by the rules. I mean,
we talked about that earlier.
Yeah, we did. And if I found a shorter way of doing something, or if I didn't like a rule, if I could get away without following that rule, I would. And I think we need more people who will do that. But we also need, I mean, you have to be a little brave to do that because there is a risk.
Well, we need to make you Minister of Scissors or something like that.
Absolutely, happy to do that.
Well, we may talk.
May talk about that. The thing with red tape is that there needs to be accountability. Red tape's about accountability, but I think in the bureaucracy, a lot of people overdo it in terms of accountability, and you don't need to do that. I actually think there's a really good opportunity to put a person to actually help people get around the red tape. You know, if you appointed one person in government to go around businesses and help them fill out the forms, get through the system, understand the system, that would be money well spent. And you know, without then having to necessarily change a whole culture and a whole system.
Ideal solutions.
Ideal solutions, absolutely, yes. So I think that's really important from a government point of view.
I get, and I don't want to go on a bit. Well, no, I will, and it's just an observation. We all talk about it. We hear governments say, okay, well, if we want to put one new piece of regulation in, we need to take 2 out, and we say, oh well, that's fine. We need to take 10 out, or we need to take 20 out. You know, we need the surgeon's knife to come through, and
we certainly do, because people won't. I mean, businesses have said to me, you know, I haven't got the time, and I don't understand all this, and that's the problem.
And to that point, I was in a meeting with Central Coast Manufacturing Connect. A leading manufacturer that's gone 30% increase in business. So an extraordinary case study on the Central Coast. Do you apply for R&D grants? We used to, it's too hard.
So there's a prime example.
Just too hard. So, okay, well, thank you, Minister, for exercising red tape. We'll work on that.
But I think there's a couple of other things too. I think business has to do a lot for themselves as well. And
yes.
I think it's not all about government. And there is a lot available out there. And, you know, I understand that they're time poor, but technology is fabulous at the moment, and it's going to be better with NBN rollout. But people have the opportunity to just go onto the internet and find out where services are. It's not as hard as it was.
And I shouldn't make it sound as though it rests with government to fix it. Absolutely, you know your way around in the nicest possible way. But the fact is, businesses, it is their obligation. If they are in business, they are in the business of shortcutting things.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Do that.
There's another thing too. I think that if I had a magic wand, one of the things I think is about government does the one size fits all. And my colleagues, if they listen to this, will have a laugh, because I was always in my meetings with my colleagues from around the state saying, don't give me a template approach. And that's what government does. And the Central Coast, for instance, in terms of some of the incentives that are provided, are not for small or home businesses. And Central Coast is full of those. So, you know, it's, for instance, the payroll tax deductions are available for businesses who have a certain number of people. If you're a home business just starting up, you can't get those, you know, particular incentives. So it doesn't allow, there's not an opportunity then for you to grow with the help of a government incentive. And so government needs to understand the uniqueness of certain regions or certain parts of the world to be able to then provide them with the opportunity and the encouragement and the incentives to grow. And that's what I think needs to happen.
And whose job is that? Is that because we need a quorum or a forum for that discussion. Now, I'd think New South Wales Business Chamber or the individual, well, no, let's start with New South Wales Business Chamber as being a focal point or a cluster of those people. But often those members are in those at-home businesses, are in local chambers and don't even get involved with so do we do enough to get those?
Look, I think...
Do we do enough? It's sounding like a government thing. But business, do we get people together enough to
Well,
talk that through?
perhaps not. I know that there are a number of forums around the Central Coast now. I think that what's missing, and it's this old adage around the Central Coast, if you get one, you end up with 2 or 3, and you lose the opportunity that you tried to develop. And I'm not sure that those forums are linked to anything, i.e. linked to the decision makers. So why not get all of why not make each of those individual forums? Why not come up with some strategies out of those or priorities out of those, and then collectively get those groups together and put it up to government?
You may have given us a task at Business Insight, because our charter is exactly in that area, giving a voice and starting discussions that do lead somewhere.
But we've got to combine it. We've got to actually unite and bring it together. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Absolutely.
The chairman of RDA came here and talked about our level of comfort on the Central Coast as being an inhibitor of growth. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I think we are too comfortable. You know, it's a pretty easy life on the Central Coast. You know, we've got generally beautiful weather, but you know, lovely beaches, lovely place to live and to work, to retire to. And as a result, I think we don't tend to take advantage of what else is going on in the world. It's easy to sit in your laurels and let things go. So I think we do have to be much more innovative in terms of looking outside.
And that leads to that next question of, you know, are we introspective here, and we've got to recreate, and a little to your point, you know, don't give me a cookie cutter solution, so we tend to try and recreate things, but the opportunity is to say, hey, we probably don't have unique issues here and we need to look outside the region.
Absolutely. And it's also about not having the same, you know, it's that template issue, not just putting something on the Central Coast and saying we'll make it work. But I do remember actually early in my career, I think it was the Sunshine Coast sent their councils down. I think it's one council there, and they sent a whole great contingent down here and talked with Gosford Council and Wyong Council. Came in, and I was involved in some of that discussion.
They had to talk to 2 bodies.
Absolutely. Well, that's true too, but they also, there was a number of government agency people involved, and I was involved in that. And, you know, if we had a contingent from the Central Coast that then determined where, you know, there are some good things happening, that we would then go and talk to them, that would be ideal. We do bring in people, we do bring in specialists. When we were doing, Gosford Council was doing the Gosford Challenge, we had some fabulous people that we'd actually brought in to do some really good consultancy work. We do that, but I don't think we do it as well as what we could.
It was all, bringing someone into your home is quite different to you going and visiting someone else's home. I
absolutely.
think. So,
well, I know I mean, the number of times that I've been overseas. I mean, I often listen to the news, depending if I can speak the language, and you know, have a look at what's going on, and it's really interesting to see what's going on. And often they're the same problems. You know, overseas they have the same problems that we have. But it'd be really interesting to find out what they're doing about those problems.
Well, we've imported, and I love a quote from Dr. Anton Chris. He was talking about his past life in Ipswich, in South East Queensland, talking about some of the innovations. I hope it was Ipswich. I'm pretty sure it was the innovations that he'd created, or that his team had created up there. And you know, he's using a similar sort of approach, but massage. But yeah, I think you know, going out and seeing what's going on. We look at, and I will come back to the landing. You look what's happened in Docklands in Melbourne. You go to London, and you go to Townsville and Cairns. You know, they've all solved it by putting stuff on the waterfront and building the vibrancy and the life. Sometimes we don't look.
I think if we continually not look outside well enough, we become really insular and we won't develop. So we've got to be innovative and use our initiative and go places. So yes, perhaps a small contingent of people on the Central Coast and
send them away.
Send them away, absolutely.
Yeah, you could be a tour guide.
I could do that.
Keep working on your forehand.
Thank you, I will. Backhand actually is the worst.
Is that right? That's, anyway, we shouldn't do this on camera. It should be the most natural stroke, but we'll talk about that off camera and I'll show you a few tricks.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.